On the morning of Saturday, August 15th, 2015, in the quiet town of Elmsville, Alabama, the Baptist Church Grace and Light became the site of an unprecedented act of violence. The service had started at 10 a.m., as it did every weekend, with nearly 150 congregants filling the pews. The atmosphere was serene, marked by the harmonious blend of the organ's melody and the choir's voices. Families sat together, children fidgeted in their seats, and the pastor, 54-year-old James Ellis, stood at the pulpit, delivering a sermon on forgiveness and redemption. At approximately 10:37 a.m., the tranquility was shattered. The church's double doors swung open abruptly, and a man entered. He was dressed in a dark jacket, jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. In his right hand, he held a semi-automatic handgun. Witnesses later described him as calm but purposeful, his movements methodical. He walked halfway down the aisle, stopped, and without hesitation raised the weapon. The man was later identified as Jonathan Harper, a 42-year-old former Marine. Known to many in the community, Harper was a regular churchgoer and a respected figure in Elmsville. His sudden presence with a firearm immediately drew gasps and whispers from the congregation, but before anyone could react, he fired multiple shots. 3 rounds struck Pastor Ellis, who collapsed behind the pulpit. The sound of gunfire reverberated through the church, sending panic through the crowd. Congregants screamed and scrambled for the exits, tripping over pews and each other in their desperate attempts to escape. A few brave members of the church attempted to approach Harper, but he raised the gun again, forcing them to back away. Witnesses stated that Harper showed no signs of rage or hesitation. His demeanor remained eerily composed throughout the incident. He made no effort to target anyone else. After firing his weapon, Harper lowered it, placed it on the floor, and knelt, clasping his hands behind his head. The first 911 call came in at 10:39 a.m. Within minutes, Elmsville police arrived on the scene, cordoning off the area and evaluating the remaining congregants. Officers approached Harper cautiously. After a brief verbal exchange, he surrendered without resistance. He was taken into custody and transported to the local police station for questioning. Meanwhile, Pastor Ellis was rushed to Elmsville Regional Hospital in critical condition. Emergency medical personnel confirmed that he had sustained 3 gunshot wounds, one to the shoulder, one to the abdomen, and another that grazed his leg. Surgeons began operating immediately, and hospital officials issued a statement later that day, indicating that his condition was grave but stable. The church itself was left in disarray. Broken hymnals and discarded belongings littered the pews. Bullet casings were scattered across the aisle, and a bloodstain marked the spot where Pastor Ellis had fallen. Investigators worked to secure the scene, collecting evidence and interviewing shaken witnesses. By the afternoon, the news had spread across the state, with reporters swarming Elmsville to cover the shocking incident. Harper's motives were initially unclear, leaving the small town grappling with disbelief and fear. Local officials held a press conference that evening, assuring the public that there was no ongoing threat but declining to comment further on the specifics of the case. The shooting raised questions about the security of religious spaces and left the congregation of Grace and Light deeply shaken, struggling to reconcile the violence that had invaded their sanctuary. Months before the tragic events at Grace and Light Baptist Church, the Harper family was seen by neighbors and friends as the epitome of a stable and loving household. Jonathan Harper, a 42-year-old former Marine, was the cornerstone of the family. Having served 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan, he carried the quiet intensity of a man who had seen the worst of humanity but was determined to build a better life for himself and his loved ones. Despite his military background, Harper was known to be calm and approachable, often mowing his neighbors' lawns and volunteering at the local Veterans Center. At home, Jonathan took pride in being a dedicated husband and father. He married Sarah, a 40-year-old registered nurse, shortly after returning from his first deployment. Sarah had been his rock during the turbulent years of service, managing the household and raising their son, Liam, with minimal support while Jonathan was overseas. She was well liked in the community, known for her kind demeanor and involvement in church activities. As a nurse, Sarah worked long shifts at Elmsville Regional Hospital, but she always prioritized her family, often coming home to cook dinner and ensure the house remained a sanctuary of peace. The Harpers' only child, Liam, was a 19-year-old college freshman with a passion for music. From the age of 9, Liam had been a member of the church choir, where his clear tenor voice quickly earned him recognition. Over the years, he became a prominent soloist, performing at weddings, funerals, and holiday services. He was described by his choir director as disciplined, talented, and deeply committed to his faith. Outside of choir practice, Liam excelled academically, earning a scholarship to a nearby state university. The Harper family's routine revolved around their shared faith. Every Sunday, they attended services at Grace and Light Baptist Church without fail. Jonathan often sat in the back pews, observing quietly, while Sarah participated in the women's auxiliary group. She organized bake sales, charity events, and prayer meetings. Liam, meanwhile, stood proudly with the choir, his voice blending seamlessly with the others as he sang hymns that had been part of his life for a decade. Despite their outward appearance of stability, the Harpers had their challenges. Jonathan struggled with insomnia and occasional bouts of anger, lingering remnants of his time in combat zones. Sarah, while supportive, sometimes found his emotional withdrawal difficult to manage. Yet, they maintained a united front, relying on their shared faith and love for their son to navigate any difficulties. Their modest two-story home on Willow Creek Drive reflected their personalities, practical, orderly, and warm. The walls were adorned with family photos, many of which showed Jonathan in his Marine uniform, standing beside Sarah and a younger Liam. A wooden cross hung in the living room, a reminder of the family's faith. Sarah's meticulously maintained garden bloomed with vibrant flowers, and Jonathan had recently built a small deck in the backyard where the family often gathered for meals. In the months leading up to the shooting, neighbors noticed no outward signs of trouble within the Harper household. Jonathan was seen jogging early in the mornings, Sarah continued her routine shifts at the hospital, and Liam spent much of his time practicing with the choir or studying. Their lives appeared ordinary, almost idyllic, a stark contrast to the chaos that would soon engulf them. This facade of normalcy would later become a focal point in the investigation. Friends, colleagues, and fellow church members described the Harpers as a devout and loving family. Yet, as authorities delved deeper into their lives, it became evident that beneath the surface lay unspoken tensions and hidden truths, waiting to unravel in ways no one could have foreseen. The foundation of the Harper family, so seemingly strong, would be tested to its breaking point, leaving questions about how such a tragedy could emerge from a household that appeared so stable and grounded. By the spring of 2015, subtle but noticeable changes began to appear in Liam Harper's behavior. Once a cheerful and open young man, Liam had become withdrawn and distant. His parents initially dismissed these changes as the natural growing pains of a teenager transitioning into adulthood. However, as weeks turned into months, it became clear that something deeper was troubling their son. Liam, who had always been punctual and responsible, started coming home late without explanation. When asked about his whereabouts, he provided vague answers or none at all. He no longer spent his evenings practicing choir pieces at home or discussing his college courses with his parents, as he had done in the past. Instead, he retreated to his room, locking the door for hours at a time. Jonathan and Sarah noticed that his once neat space had become cluttered and disorganized, a stark contrast to the meticulous habits he had displayed throughout his childhood. His mood became increasingly erratic. Small inconveniences triggered outbursts of frustration, while moments of prolonged silence suggested he was grappling with something he could not, or would not, share. Sarah, ever the nurturing figure, tried to approach him gently, encouraging him to open up about his feelings. She noticed the way his eyes would dart away, as though he was avoiding her gaze, and how his shoulders stiffened whenever she asked about his day. Jonathan, meanwhile, took a more observational approach, carefully watching Liam's interactions and behavior, convinced that his son was hiding something. Jonathan's military background led him to believe that Liam might have fallen into the wrong crowd. He noted the sudden changes in Liam's social habits, new phone calls, messages, and outings with people Jonathan and Sarah had never met. Liam's once clear schedule became unpredictable, and his parents began to suspect that his newfound secrecy could be tied to peer influence. Jonathan, in particular, feared that his son might be experimenting with substances or engaging in reckless behavior, though he had no concrete evidence to support these fears. Adding to their concern was Liam's declining performance in the church choir. Previously a star soloist, he began missing rehearsals and seemed disengaged during services. The choir director, who had known Liam since childhood, mentioned to Sarah that he appeared distracted and unfocused. For the first time in years, Liam had refused a solo performance for Easter Sunday, claiming he wasn't feeling up to it. This uncharacteristic lack of enthusiasm raised red flags for his parents, who saw the choir as not only his passion but also a vital part of his identity. The tension in the household grew as Liam's behavior remained unexplained. Jonathan and Sarah tried to engage him in conversations during meals, but these efforts often resulted in awkward silence or abrupt exits from the table. Liam began spending less time at home, leaving early in the morning and returning late at night. His excuses, when he gave them, were inconsistent and unconvincing, further fueling his parents' concerns. In private, Jonathan and Sarah debated how to address the issue. Sarah, driven by maternal instinct, believed that Liam was dealing with a personal struggle and needed compassion and understanding. She suggested giving him space while maintaining open lines of communication. Jonathan, however, believed that more direct action was needed. He proposed stricter monitoring of Liam's activities, including reviewing his phone and internet use. These differing approaches created a subtle divide between the couple as they grappled with their shared fear of losing their son. As the weeks passed, Liam's isolation deepened, and his behavior became increasingly erratic. Jonathan began noticing subtle changes in Liam's demeanor, moments of nervousness, a tendency to avoid eye contact, and an uncharacteristic hesitancy in his speech. Sarah, too, picked up on the signs, though she attributed them to stress or fatigue. Neither parent could have anticipated the full scope of what their son was concealing, nor the impact it would soon have on their lives. The Harper household, once filled with laughter and routine, had become a place of unspoken tension and unanswered questions. The tension in the Harper household reached a breaking point in late May 2015. By then, Jonathan and Sarah had exhausted every attempt to bridge the growing distance with their son. Their once open relationship with Liam had been replaced by secrecy and suspicion. Jonathan, in particular, grew increasingly restless. Late one evening, after Liam left without providing details of his plans, Jonathan convinced Sarah that they needed to take matters into their own hands. Reluctantly, she agreed. That night, they entered Liam's bedroom, a space they had always respected as his private sanctuary. The room was in stark contrast to the boy they had raised. Clothes were strewn across the floor, books and notebooks piled haphazardly on his desk, and his normally tidy bed was unmade. Jonathan began methodically searching through drawers and under the bed, while Sarah focused on the desk. Amid the clutter, They found nothing out of the ordinary, no drugs, no alcohol, no signs of the bad crowd Jonathan had feared. Then Sarah spotted Liam's laptop on the nightstand. It was partially hidden beneath a stack of choir sheet music, its screen dark. She hesitated, feeling a pang of guilt, but Jonathan urged her to open it. After a brief pause, she powered it on. The device was not password protected, and within moments they accessed Liam's emails and messaging apps. They scanned through benign exchanges with classmates and choir members before stumbling upon a series of messages that froze them in their tracks. The correspondence was with Pastor James Ellis, the trusted spiritual leader of Grace and Light Baptist Church. The content of the messages was startlingly personal, revealing a relationship that was far from professional or pastoral. The exchanges detailed private meetings, shared confidences, and discussions that suggested an inappropriate intimacy between the pastor and their 19-year-old son. The language, though carefully worded, left little room for misinterpretation. Jonathan's initial shock turned into simmering anger, while Sarah, reading over his shoulder, covered her mouth in disbelief. As they continued to scroll through the messages, they heard the unmistakable sound of the front door opening. Liam had returned home earlier than expected. Panic set in as Jonathan hastily closed the laptop, but it was too late. Liam entered the room and immediately understood what his parents were doing. The sight of them rifling through his personal belongings and reading his private correspondence ignited a furious confrontation. Liam's reaction was immediate and explosive. He accused Jonathan and Sarah of invading his privacy and violating his trust. Jonathan, still reeling from what he had just discovered, attempted to confront Liam about the messages, but his anger only fueled the argument. Sarah, caught between her husband and son, tried to defuse the situation, but the emotional intensity of the moment overwhelmed all three of them. The argument escalated rapidly, with raised voices echoing through the house. Liam refused to explain himself, instead focusing on his parents' betrayal. He stormed out of the room, grabbed a bag, and began packing a few belongings. Jonathan attempted to stop him, but Liam brushed past him and headed for the door. Within minutes, he was gone, leaving Jonathan and Sarah standing in stunned silence. That night, Liam did not return home. Jonathan and Sarah spent the hours that followed in a mix of anger, confusion, and fear. They had uncovered a secret that shattered their perception of their son and their trusted pastor, but they had no answers to the questions that now consumed them. Where had Liam gone? What was the true nature of his relationship with Pastor Ellis? And, most disturbingly, how had they missed the signs? The discovery left their family fractured, and the fallout was only beginning. The morning after the explosive argument, Jonathan Harper set out to find his son. Liam had not returned home, and Sarah, distraught and anxious, spent the night calling friends and searching for any sign of him. By midday, Jonathan tracked him down at a friend's house across town. The friend's parents confirmed Liam was there but had kept his presence quiet, respecting his wish to stay away from home. Jonathan, still reeling from the events of the previous night, approached Liam with a measured tone, convincing him to come home and resolve the situation. As father and son drove back in silence, the tension inside the vehicle was palpable. Jonathan's mind raced with unanswered questions and mounting anger over what he had read in the messages. Liam, on the other hand, sat slouched in the passenger seat, his arms crossed and eyes fixed on the passing scenery. It was clear he was struggling with the weight of his secret. The silence eventually became too much for Liam, and he began to speak. Liam admitted that he was gay and had been struggling to accept his identity for years. He described how he had kept this part of himself hidden from everyone, fearing judgment and rejection from his family, friends, and community. Over the past several months, he had confided in Pastor James Ellis, who had become a source of guidance and support. However, Their relationship had grown more personal, evolving into something Liam hesitantly described as mutual and consensual. He revealed that their meetings had taken place in secret, and the messages Jonathan and Sarah had discovered were only a fraction of the full scope of their interactions. Jonathan listened in stunned silence as Liam spoke. His initial shock quickly gave way to a volatile mix of emotions. Anger surged at the thought of the pastor, a trusted figure in their church, engaging in a relationship with his son. At the same time, a deep sense of betrayal cut through him as he realized how much Liam had hidden. Layered beneath this was a profound sadness, both for his son's struggles and for his own perceived failure as a father. By the time Liam finished, Jonathan was gripping the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. He said nothing, focusing instead on the road ahead. When they arrived home, Jonathan parked the car and walked into the house without acknowledging Liam further. Sarah, who had been waiting anxiously, attempted to ask what had happened, but Jonathan brushed past her. He went directly to the garage, where he spent several hours alone, pacing and replaying Liam's confession in his mind. The anger he felt toward Pastor Ellis was unlike anything he had experienced before. To Jonathan, this was not just a personal betrayal, it was a violation of trust, a moral failing, and an unforgivable transgression. By nightfall, Jonathan's silence began to unsettle Sarah. She approached him, urging him to talk, but he refused to engage. Instead, he left the house without explanation and drove to a nearby bar. There, he spent hours drinking, trying to drown the turmoil within him. The usually disciplined and controlled former Marine found himself unraveling, consumed by thoughts of revenge and justice. He replayed the details of Liam's confession in his mind, each word fueling his anger further. Jonathan returned home in the early hours of the morning. He entered the house quietly, careful not to wake Sarah or Liam. Without pausing, he went to the small safe in their bedroom closet where he kept his handgun. His movements were deliberate, almost mechanical, as he unlocked the safe, retrieved the weapon, and checked its ammunition. The weight of the gun in his hand felt heavier than usual, as if reflecting the gravity of what he intended to do. Sarah woke and saw Jonathan with the weapon. She immediately sensed the danger and tried to intervene, pleading with him to stop and think. Jonathan did not respond. His face was blank, his body tense. He moved past her with a sense of finality, heading toward the front door. Sarah's attempts to block his path were futile. Jonathan's mind was set. He stepped into the night, leaving Sarah behind in tears, as he disappeared into the darkness, carrying the gun in his hand. The shooting at Grace and Light Baptist Church sent shockwaves through the small town of Elmsville. By midday, news outlets across Alabama had picked up the story, and the once quiet town became the center of media attention. Residents who had known the Harper family for years were left stunned, struggling to reconcile the image of Jonathan Harper, a respected veteran and devoted father, with the man now accused of attempted murder. Pastor James Ellis was rushed to Elmsville Regional Hospital in critical condition. Emergency surgery lasted several hours as doctors worked to remove bullets from his abdomen and shoulder. His survival was uncertain in the first 24 hours, but by the next day, hospital officials announced that he was in stable condition. He remained under close medical supervision, unable to provide any statements about the attack. Jonathan Harper was immediately arrested at the scene. He offered no resistance and reportedly cooperated fully with law enforcement. Witnesses described his demeanor as calm, almost detached, as officers placed him in handcuffs and escorted him out of the church. At the police station, he invoked his right to remain silent, declining to answer questions about his motives. Investigators, however, had little difficulty piecing together a preliminary narrative. They had confiscated Jonathan's phone, which contained searches related to gun laws and the pastor's schedule, suggesting a premeditated act. The Harper household became a focal point of scrutiny. Reporters camped outside their home, seeking statements from family members and neighbors. Sarah Harper, blindsided by her husband's actions, refused to speak to the media. Inside the home, she grappled with the emotional fallout. She struggled to understand what could have driven Jonathan, a man she thought she knew so well, to commit such an act of violence. The weight of the public's judgment, combined with her own feelings of confusion and betrayal, left her emotionally paralyzed. Liam, meanwhile, bore the brunt of the personal guilt. He believed his confession to his father had triggered the chain of events leading to the shooting. The knowledge that the man he had trusted and confided in, Pastor Ellis, was now fighting for his life only deepened his sense of responsibility. Liam withdrew further into himself, avoiding both his mother and the outside world. Friends from the choir reached out, but he ignored their messages, consumed by the belief that he had destroyed his family. The town's reaction was polarized. Some members of the congregation expressed sympathy for Jonathan, citing the emotional turmoil he must have experienced. Others condemned his actions unequivocally, emphasizing the sanctity of the church as a place of peace and forgiveness. Speculation about the nature of the relationship between Liam and Pastor Ellis fueled rumors, creating an undercurrent of tension within the community. Law enforcement officials held a press conference 2 days after the shooting, confirming Jonathan's arrest and charges of attempted murder, aggravated assault, and unlawful possession of a firearm in a place of worship. The district attorney's office announced plans to pursue the case aggressively, framing it as a violent breach of public trust. Bail was denied at Jonathan's initial hearing, and he was transferred to the county jail to await trial. Within the Harper family, the strain was immense. Sarah found herself questioning every decision she had made as a wife and mother. She began replaying the past months in her mind, searching for warning signs she might have missed. Her faith, once unshakable, was tested as she struggled to reconcile her belief in forgiveness with the actions of her husband. As the days turned into weeks, the Harper name became synonymous with scandal in Elmsville. The community's support for the family waned, with former friends distancing themselves out of fear of association. The church, though still operational, saw a decline in attendance as the congregation wrestled with its collective grief and confusion. The story of the shooting and its aftermath became a cautionary tale, dissected in local editorials and town meetings. For Jonathan, Sarah, and Liam, the consequences of that single act reverberated far beyond the walls of the church, leaving their lives irrevocably changed. What had once been a tight-knit family was now fractured, each member isolated by their own pain and regret. The weight of the event hung heavy over the town, a lingering reminder of the destructive power of secrets and unspoken truths. The trial of Jonathan Harper began in November 2015, drawing widespread attention not only in Elmsville but across the state. The courtroom was packed with reporters, community members, and church congregants, all eager to witness the resolution of a case that had fractured their small town. Jonathan, charged with attempted murder and aggravated assault, sat stoically as the proceedings unfolded. His defense team presented his military service and mental health struggles as mitigating factors, but the prosecution painted a picture of a calculated act of violence carried out in a sacred space. The pivotal moment of the trial came when Liam Harper was called to testify. His appearance on the stand was unexpected, as many assumed he would avoid the public scrutiny his testimony would bring. Liam, however, had made the difficult decision to address the court, knowing his words could shape not only the outcome of the trial but also his family's future. In his testimony, Liam revealed the full nature of his relationship with Pastor James Ellis. He admitted that their connection had been deeply personal and acknowledged that it had caused pain and division in his family. However, he made it clear that his involvement with Ellis had been entirely voluntary. He emphasized that he had never been coerced or manipulated, refuting the narrative that his father's actions were necessary to protect him. Liam's statement was delivered with a mix of vulnerability and resolve, and his words hung heavily in the courtroom. Jonathan, seated beside his attorney, listened intently as his son spoke. For the first time, he fully confronted the consequences of his actions. He realized that his decision to attack Pastor Ellis had not been motivated solely by a desire to defend Liam, but by his own inability to accept his son's truth. Jonathan's deep-seated fears, prejudices, and unprocessed trauma had driven him to commit an act of violence that had only further damaged the family he sought to protect. The weight of this realization was visible on his face as Liam concluded his testimony. The trial concluded with Jonathan addressing the court during the sentencing phase. In a brief but poignant statement, he apologized to Liam, Sarah, Pastor Ellis, and the entire community. He expressed regret for the harm he had caused and acknowledged that his actions had been wrong, regardless of his intentions. Jonathan's remorse was evident, but it was not enough to sway the court. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in prison, citing the severity of the crime and the sanctity of the location where it had occurred. For Liam, the trial marked the beginning of a difficult journey toward forgiveness and self-acceptance. He returned to the church choir, finding solace in the music that had once brought him so much joy. Though many in the community continued to whisper about his testimony and the controversy surrounding his relationship with Pastor Ellis, Liam chose to focus on rebuilding his life. The experience had hardened him, but it also gave him a newfound sense of resilience. Sarah Harper remained a constant presence in her family's lives, even as it had been fractured by the events of the past year. She visited Jonathan regularly in prison, holding onto the belief that their family could find healing despite the odds. Though her faith had been tested, she found comfort in the hope that redemption was possible for all of them. The Harper family story became a symbol of the complexities of love, forgiveness, and the consequences of unspoken truths. Though their lives would never return to what they once were, each member found a path forward, shaped by the lessons learned from their shared tragedy. In the quiet moments at church, as Liam's voice rose in harmony with the choir, there was a sense that, even amidst pain and loss, redemption could be found.